Moving forward again. Moving forward again. Daryl gave a soft grunt, seemingly uninterested, and didn't ask any more. The two walked out of the barn's shadow side by side. In the open space not far away, several camping lamps cast a warm glow that pushed back the night. Carol, Jenny, and the others huddled around a simple grill, turning over the sizzling venison. The smell of fat hitting the coals drifted on the breeze. Rick had an arm around Carl's shoulder, talking. Marge smiled as she handed a plate to Glenn. "Hoot!" Just then Robin, who had been keeping watch outside, saw Louis and fluttered over, landing steadily on his shoulder. Louis stroked the bird's head and subconsciously tightened his grip on the case in his other hand. He took one last look at the deep dark behind him, then stepped into the light. A few days had passed peacefully since that conversation in the barn. Louis noticed how the tension that had hung around Rick, Shane, and Lori began to change. For the first day or two, their eye contact was still awkward and avoided, but the barrier slowly melted. Several times Louis saw them gathered apart from the group, talking in low voices. He couldn't hear what they said, but their bodies relaxed as they spoke, and the old misunderstandings seemed to be working themselves out. Yesterday evening, passing by the tent, he had overheard a few fragments between Rick and Lori, words like trust, brother, and starting over. In that moment, Louis knew the matter was settled. The next morning, sunlight filled Herschel's dining room. While everyone ate oatmeal and bread, Lori set down her spoon, took a breath, and announced, "I'm pregnant." The table went silent. Carol covered her mouth in happy surprise. Herschel bowed his head in a quiet benediction with a smile, and the others offered blessings. In the apocalypse, a new life is a burden, but to them, it was also hope. Louis sat to the side, watching faces. Rick squeezed Lori's hand, his features settling into the responsibility of husband and father. No gloom, just resolve. Shane sat quietly, then raised his cup in a distant toast to Rick, a bitter but sincere smile at the corner of his mouth. Louis exhaled in relief and tore off a piece of bread. The talk in the barn had worked better than he'd expected. Rick had let it go, but Rick didn't sit. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice solemn. He looked across the table at Shane. "Lori and I have talked." Rick met his old friend's eyes, the man he'd known since the academy, and spoke slowly. "We want to find a godfather for this unborn 10. Shane froze, cup midway to his lips. Rick continued, his gaze sweeping past Louis, who was still chewing, and toward Carl. "But not just for this 10. We want someone for Carl and Louis, too. Shane." Rick reached out, earnestness plain on his face. "We hope you'll be their godfather." The room was quiet again. Even Louis, braced for it, blinked in surprise at being included in the package. Carl whooped, "That's great, Uncle Shane." Shane stared at Rick, then at Lori. She didn't look away. Her expression was layered, but she nodded. Shock, emotion, and guilt collided in Shane's eyes until they turned wet. Godfather. He started to speak, voice thick, then couldn't find the words. "What? You're not willing?" Rick asked with a raised eyebrow, teasing. Lori chimed in with a long overdue joke. "Or do you think taking care of 3 kids is too much trouble and want to back out?" The jab brought something up in Shane. He hadn't expected Rick to make this move. After everything, Rick was still trusting him with his back. Shane swallowed hard. He knew they were brothers who would face life and death together. As for Lori, whatever had been broken before might never return to the old friendship, and things would probably be awkward. But this offered him a respectable way to stay and protect the place. "No, damn it." Shane stood, wiped his eyes, looked to Lori with a solemn nod like a private reconciliation, then strode over to Rick. He gripped his hand hard and then hugged him. "It's my honor, brother." Watching, the others' faces lit with relief and amusement. They had all suspected the complicated tie between the three, but no one expected it to end like this. Merle, with his mouth, had gone hunting before dawn with his younger brother. If he'd been there, he'd have ruined the moment with some sarcastic remark. Louis couldn't stop smiling. Things had moved faster than he'd thought, but the result was good. The time bomb that might have split the group had been dismantled. The next morning, Herschel's farm buzzed with departure. Everyone loaded the last supplies onto vehicles. Louis leaned against the RV and looked out over the farm, the distant sun, and the orderly fields free of walkers. He felt something loosen. I really didn't expect, he muttered to himself. Rick, the stronghold destroyer, actually broke the curse this time and let us leave the two peacefully. Before he could fully exhale, the scout jeep came rumbling back. The door opened, and Rick and the others climbed out. Their faces were dark, weighed down as if they'd seen a tragedy. "Why are you back?" Lewis asked, confused, stepping forward. "The road ahead is clear, but," Rick hesitated, "we made a detour to that auto repair shop to see if we could strip parts before we left." "And?" Shane asked. Daryl cut in, his voice flat. "It's finished, overrun, packed with walkers and bodies." Rick took a long breath, trying to steady the image in his head. "We found some things, left by whoever was there." He pointed as he spoke. On the mottled outer wall of the repair shop, someone had sprayed a line in bright red, the paint mixed with what looked like dried blood. The message, full of hatred, read, "The false god is dead. All the believers are enemies. 142, towards the future." Underneath those words, several crosses had been marked with red X's, each one radiating hatred and curse. The group fell silent. Even without seeing the scene, everyone could guess what had happened. "Heh, these toothless sheep sure have big hearts," Merle scoffed. "When things went south, every one of them tucked their tail and hid. Now that we've killed everyone, they've got the nerve to come out and play at revenge," he added. "If they actually ran into those believers, who knows who'd be the unlucky ones," another said. Louis listened from the side as Merle complained, saying nothing aloud, but his thoughts were sharp. He didn't know who would end up unlucky later, but one thing was clear. "I see," he thought. I was wondering how Rick's Stronghold Crusher passive could have failed. It hadn't failed to trigger, the skill had simply been aimed at the wrong target. No matter who it hit, this was the best result for them. With no pursuers behind and the road ahead clear, the convoy finally stopped hesitating and officially rolled out amid the roar of engines. Dust rose on the highway and Herschel's farm slipped far into the distance. The trip to the prison no longer carried the panic and uncertainty of their first escape. In the original run, they'd fled in chaos, surrounded by fire and a tide of walkers, losing most of their supplies and nearly getting separated. This time was different. The convoy, an RV, pickups, and motorcycles, was no longer a retreating, desperate refugee group. After the fierce fights at the Believers' camp and the auto repair shop, nerves were taut and weapons stayed loaded. Few bandits dared mess with such a well-armed column. Occasional roadblocks were set up by small gangs, only to be turned over by Merle and his crew, who stripped them bare. Lewis sat in the back seat, watching the scenery blur past. His gaze seemed to pierce the forest, toward the far north, the direction of the CDC. "Just you wait," he thought. "When my demonic arts are complete, no, when I've mastered those key spells, I might have to come back." A sharp screech of brakes snapped him out of his reverie. The convoy slowed and stopped at a weed-choked fork in the road. "Louis," Carl nudged him excitedly and pointed through the windshield. "We're here, look ahead." Louis sat up and followed the point. A complex of buildings stood by the roadside, ringed with layers of barbed wire and tall concrete walls. The coils of wire crowned the fences, the barbs glinting sharp. Gray watchtowers guarded the corners. Though old and austere, their defensive presence was oddly reassuring. Robin, the owl, seemed to feel it too. The bird fluttered out of the car, giving a pleased hoot. Its large eyes fixed on the highest watchtower as if approving the place. Louis stroked Robin's head, inhaled deeply, and pushed the rest of his messy thoughts away. "Let's go." He opened the car door, jumped down, straightened the cap on his head, and a hopeful smile crept across his face. "Let's see our new home." Meanwhile, in a dim basement smelling of engine oil and blood, sizzle! A red-hot branding iron pressed into flesh with a charred, grinding sound. "Ah!" The man tied to the chair screamed, his body convulsing. Iron chains held him fast. The executioner was a woman. Firelight picked out the weathered planes of her face. There was no mercy there, only a hatred so intense it could choke. "Still gonna lie?" she asked flatly. She tossed the cooling iron back into the brazier and splashed sparks. "That night, your people stormed our camp, killed all my companions, and stole our supplies." Her voice echoed in the cellar. "You called it God's judgment, and now you say it wasn't you?" "It really wasn't us." The man broke down completely. Tears and snot smeared his face as he shook his head. When we went back that day, the base was already burned. Lord Shepherd is dead too. If we'd had that kind of power, how could we have fallen like that? Lies. She remembered everything. Flames leaping, her companion's screams. They'd been inside, unable to see, only hearing cries from outside the door. It's the believers. Those lunatics are back. Ignoring the other's desperate pleas, she had flung the door open and chased after them, but in the night and fire, she'd only seen the back of the lead man as the convoy fled. A cold light crept into her eyes. She picked up a red-hot iron rod and stepped forward again. The leader was a man, she said, voice low. Tall and cunning, more like a practiced butcher than a religious fanatic. As she spoke, the captive's expression shifted from confusion to thought, as if something clicked. And, she went on, stopping in front of him, the glowing rod throwing her face into twisted relief, he always had a fully armed child at his side. The man's eyes widened, his face drained of color. Suddenly he blurted out, frantic as if grabbing at a lifeline, "I've got it! It wasn't us! Those weren't believers at all!" He babbled, desperate. "I know who he is! That bastard! He must have been impersonating us." He described the group they'd captured back then, different from other survivors. Many of them, old and young, and a lead man who even had a child with him. "I should have thought of it sooner," he muttered. "The shepherd's death is tied to them. This whole thing, he framed us." The woman's arm froze. The iron rod hovered, sending out waves of heat. "Who is he?" she asked. The captive swallowed a mouthful of bloody spit and answered in a trembling voice, fear thick in his words. "I don't know his real name, but I heard his men call him the governor." He choked. That child at his side must have been his daughter. Silence fell in the basement, broken only by the occasional crackle from the brazier. The woman straightened slowly and tossed the iron back into the fire. Sparks flew, and in their glow a new flame kindled in eyes that had seemed dead. She ground the name out between clenched teeth, as if to crush it. The governor. The afternoon sun was bright, cutting through thin clouds and spilling across the dead, silent land. The convoy stopped a safe distance from the prison. When the engines died, the world seemed to hold its breath. Only the wind and the low moans of walkers beyond the fences broke the silence. Luis jumped down onto the dusty road and looked up. It was a massive complex, watchtowers at each corner and high gray concrete walls that loomed like an impenetrable barrier, isolating whatever lay inside. Layers of chain-link fence, rusted in places, caught the light and glinted darkly. The barbed wire along the top still looked vicious. He breathed in the dry, cool afternoon air. It wasn't the comfort of the CDC's air conditioning or security system, but those thick walls and menacing wire felt dependable in their own way. "As far as this stage goes," he muttered, squinting at the aimless shapes inside the fence. "This place is pretty good." He took it all in. The intact walls, the open sight lines, the large area that could be farmed. "Looks like we'll be staying here a while." "Everyone out and on guard." Rick's voice cut across Lewis's thoughts. Doors opened, and a fully armed group spilled out, rapidly forming up. After the trials of the road, even the child showed no excessive panic, instead slipping close to the adults. Rick, Shane, and the others moved forward with binoculars, studying the yard. The strip of grass outside the gate was wide, probably meant as a buffer or exercise yard. Now it was waist-high weeds, and scattered through the withered grass, hundreds of walkers. Most wore prison uniforms. There were a few guards' outfits and some civilian clothes mixed in. "There's a lot of them," Shane said, frowning. "Just out here alone there are dozens. Must be more inside." "These are just appetizers." Merle chewed gum he'd found and idly shook his shotgun. "Once we open that gate, I'll blast 'em to pieces in minutes." "Merle, don't be itching to fire everything," Rick snapped. "Gunshots will draw walkers from other parts of the prison, or from outside, right to us. We don't know the layout yet. Conserve ammo and avoid getting surrounded." "So what's the plan?" T-Dog asked. "Cut a hole in the fence and pull them out one by one?" Rick shook his head. "That would be safe but slow. They had dozens of people, many vehicles, and supplies to bring in. They needed a way to drive the convoy into the inner yard. We drive the cars into the inner courtyard, shut the gate, and then clear it." Morales pointed toward the heavy iron gate. "That could work, but—" Rick's gaze fixed on the mass of walkers blocking the entrance. If we just charge the gate, they'll get flattened under the wheels and jam them. The convoy will be immobilized. I'll draw them off, Daryl said, already eyeing his motorcycle. No need for the fuss. Louis walked over and gently patted the owl asleep on his shoulder. This is small potatoes for Robin. Daryl cocked an eyebrow but didn't argue. Louis rummaged in Daryl's saddlebag and pulled out a recently dead field mouse, the snack he'd saved for Robin. He slit the mouse's belly with his knife to let the scent of blood out, then dangled it and pointed to a section of fence away from the main gate. Robin, take those things for a walk. The little owl woke, gave a soft cry, grabbed the bleeding mouse, and spread its wings. It glided low along the far fence, then deliberately dropped the mouse onto a hook on the wire and beat its wings, making the metal and grass rustle. The walkers' attention snapped to it. Their senses, though dulled, were still alert to movement and the smell of fresh blood. They stumbled and shuffled toward the sound, leaving the gate area much less crowded. Not bad. Daryl snorted a laugh. More useful than that bastard Merle. Those who had never seen Robin's tricks before, Herschel and Marge among them, stood in stunned silence. My God, Herschel adjusted his glasses, disbelief plain on his face. That bird understands, smarter than a sheepdog. Seeing the gate area cleared, Rick didn't waste the moment. Move. The convoy's engines roared, and taking advantage of the opening, the vehicles drove into the outer yard. As the last truck slipped through, Glenn and T-Dog jumped from the bed, latched the heavy chain-link gate, and locked it with a thick iron chain. The clang of the lock cut them off from the mass outside. The walkers were trapped in the yard, but there were still too many of them to ignore. The ones Robin had lured began to drift back, swaying toward the group. Everyone, execute the plan, Rick barked. They spilled from the vehicles and took their positions. Shooting team, take the high ground. Andrea, Morgan, Morales, and others scrambled up the ladders to the watchtowers flanking the gate, rifles ready to cover everything from above. Remember, unless absolutely necessary, don't fire, Rick warned. Understood. Andrea thumbed her safety and peered down, eyes sharp. Containment team, split to the flanks. Miguel, Beth, Jackie, and the rest grabbed iron bars and ran to the fences. They hammered the chain link, shouting and making a commotion. Hey! Over here! Come and get me, you ugly bastards! The noise pulled the walkers apart, easing pressure on the gate and preventing a concentrated frontal surge. Melee team with me. Rick raised a machete. Shane, Daryl, Al, and Philip took up axes, crowbars, hammers, spears, anything with reach. The lineup was overkill for a few dozen walkers, and their faces were lit with a hunter's excitement. Come on, little babies. Merle barked a weird laugh, spun his axe, and ran out first. 144. Clean up prisons. The battle was about to break out. Rick led Daryl, Marge, T-Dog, and the others, taking charge of the left wing. With a single blow, he split a walker's skull, black ichor splattering everywhere. He didn't even blink, kicking the corpse aside and swinging his blade at another that lunged from the side. Beside him, Daryl, uncharacteristically not carrying his crossbow, moved with a hunting knife, cutting nimbly through the horde. The right wing was led by Shane, trailed by Merle, Al, Philip, and the rest. Shane had switched to a heavy machete, the blade sweeping through the air and cleaving a walker's head clean in two. Al and Philip moved with surprising coordination. Al held a spear to pin a walker back, while Philip followed up, smashing its skull with a hefty iron hammer. The two teams advanced side by side, an unbroken human wall. They were a living bulldozer, forcing the surging mass of walkers back and carving a bloody path across the lawn. Louis stayed out of the melee. He stood on the guard tower with Robin, who had returned from a successful mission, perched on his shoulder. Marge, that big guy in the uniform on the left. Watch his charge, he called. Shane, one's crawling out of the bushes at 3 o'clock. He alerted his teammates at the right moments, binoculars in hand, calmly watching the whole field. He acted as radar and backup, ready to support them if anything went wrong. Under that near-perfect coordination, the once daunting horde thinned noticeably. Corpses piled up, and the stench of rot rolled over the grass. The battle finally ended when Merle's axe finished off the last walker. Rick panted, wiped blood and grime from his face, and looked around. The lawn was littered with bodies, but all his people were still standing. Apart from a few scratches, no one was hurt. For the moment, This outer area belonged to them. Rick turned to his blood-splattered companions, exhilaration tempered by fatigue. A tired, satisfied smile touched his mouth. "This is our first step," he said, "but it's not over yet." He looked up at the main building. "Next, we're taking the inside." Hope burned in everyone's eyes. Some of the younger fighters gripped their weapons like they wanted to rush the doors right then. Rick softened his voice. "But before that, everyone, rest and regroup here for 10 minutes. Drink water, eat something, get your strength back." He pointed toward the closed doors of the main building. "The hard fight's still ahead. I need you sharp." At that, tense shoulders loosened. A collective exhale rolled over the group, and they sank to the grass, savoring a moment of peace. Herschel didn't join the others in grabbing water. The old farmer walked to a patch of ground that hadn't been churned up, squatted, and let his calloused fingers dig into the soil. He rubbed the grit between his palms and brought it to his nose, inhaling carefully. For Herschel, who had farmed his whole life, the smell of earth and decaying leaves was the sweetest thing there was. "How is it?" Marge asked, handing him a bottle of water. Herschel looked up and smiled openly. "A bit compacted, but fertile. Turn it over, bring some water in, plant tomatoes, cucumbers, soybeans, whatever. It won't be a problem." "Really?" The people nearby, wiping sweat from their brows, fell quiet. Glenn's Adam's apple bobbed as he muttered, "Farming." The idea of fresh vegetables lit everyone's faces. Their current food supply was enough, but the chance to grow their own meant stability, a path to self-reliance. "That's right," Herschel said, brushing dirt from his hands. "With seeds and time, we can turn this into a much bigger farm." As visions of a better future began to take shape, Jockey's voice cut through, not unkindly, but cautious. "I don't mean to spoil the mood, but this place might not be as secure as we think." She stood by the outer wire fence, running a hand along the rusted posts. As a former city planning worker, she had an eye for structures. "This fencing is old. A lot of the joints are rusted." She pointed toward the open fields beyond. "There are a lot of us now, with dozens of living people clustered together, the scent's strong. If a horde gets drawn here and they all press on one spot," her meaning was clear. "This thin wire could be crushed or ripped open." A chill passed through the group. If the fence failed, the compound would become a trap. "We need to reinforce the defenses," Shane said, "or find something to plug the fence." "Blocking their sight won't help," Daryl added. "They work off smell and sound." Everyone fell a bit silent, uncertain where to begin, until Lewis, who'd been listening quietly, suddenly spoke, thoughtful. "Since they use smell to find us, why not use that?" "Use it?" Rick asked. Lewis pointed to the walker corpses on the ground and laid out an idea he had seen in another place. "We pick some strong walkers, sever their jaws so they can't bite, and take their arms so they can't scratch. Then we chain them to the outside of the fence every few meters." He shrugged at the stunned faces. "Their rot will mask our living scent. There'll be camouflage and guards. If anything living or anything else comes close, their agitation will warn us." Silence followed for a few seconds. Then Merle burst out laughing and slapped his thigh. "Jesus Christ, kid, where the hell do you think this stuff up? That's wicked." T-Dog rubbed his arms and admitted, "It's disgusting, but it's clever." Glenn's eyes lit up. "It's harsh, but it makes sense." The crew's admiration for Louis grew. This kid always seemed to come up with something surprising and useful. Rick nodded slowly. "That's a big project. Once we've cleared the inside and everyone is settled, we'll start working on it." Having seized the outer lawn, Rick still wasn't satisfied. The real supplies, the armory, and a safe place to live were all inside the prison buildings. The main gate led to a wide internal courtyard, and another massive horde of walkers roamed there, more numerous than the ones they'd already cleared. "Listen," Rick said, lowering his voice as his eyes swept over the weapons everyone carried. "For the next fight, try not to use guns." "Fuck, no guns again? Are you out of your mind?" Merle said, slapping the rifle in his hands as if looking at an idiot. "We've got plenty of bullets now, and that chain-link fence outside keeps the ones out there from getting in. Wouldn't it be easier to just stand here and blast them? Why bother with knife fights?" Daryl mocked. "Watch your mouth, you little punk." Merle's eyes flashed, and he spat on the ground. "When I was drawing blood with a knife, you were still—" All right. Lewis cut in at the right moment, breaking up the brewing argument. I think Uncle Darrell means we have the manpower now. As long as those slow ones don't circle us, we can handle them with knives. There's no point in wasting bullets and attracting more walkers, Rick added. Merle snorted, but didn't press it. Rick gave Lewis a grateful look and took charge. Exactly. This place is like an echo valley. Keep your profile low and finish the job quietly. Morales chuckled. Looks like the sheriff who once rode a horse into a horde and fired off a gun finally learned what low profile means. Andrea smiled. Maybe there's no helicopter here for him to chase, Glenn jabbed, and no tank for him to hide in either. Rick muttered something about a momentary lapse in judgment and lack of foresight, and the group laughed. Only Lewis stood off to the side, lips twitching. If his memory of the old timeline held, a helicopter would crash nearby months from now, and eventually the governor would haul a tank up to their doorstep. But that was for later. For now, it was time to clear the prison. Rick left Herschel and the other non-combatants in the relatively safe outer area and led 2 teams through an opened iron gate into the inner courtyard. They moved like knives into the horde, silent, efficient. Then, just as the momentum carried them into the center, their advance hit a wall. Fuck! What the hell is this? Merle shouted as his fire axe slammed into a walker's shoulder with a dull clang. The blow bounced off and smarted his hand. A group of former prison guard walkers shuffled toward them in full protective gear, black Kevlar vests, puncture-resistant neck guards, and riot helmets with visors. They looked like walking iron cans, mixed in with the other walkers, and suddenly the toughest things to kill. That's riot gear, Shane barked. Don't hit the body. I'm trying for the head. Darrell snapped back. He kicked a riot-helmeted walker away. At that range, the crossbow was useless. His bolt glanced off the smooth visor. T-Dog picked up a riot shield and managed only to push them back. From the watchtower, Louis yelled down, "The jaw! Attack the jaw! Push the visors up or stab from under the chin!" That gap between helmet and neck guard? Aim there! Destroy the brainstem, someone added. Darrell moved first. When a riot gear walker lunged, he sidestepped and thrust his hunting knife upward through the gap between helmet and neck guard. The blade found the brainstem and the armored walker collapsed. "Ha! That's how you do it!" he crowed. Everyone concentrated on the neck joints and the lower edges of the visors. The once indestructible iron cans were ripped apart like empty packs, and in a short, brutal span, the courtyard was cleared. The setting sun had stained the prison's high gray walls blood red by the time they finished. Rick didn't pause to wipe his sweat. He led his people across the field of bodies and into the main building. He vaulted through a pried-open iron gate and up into the control room. The air was stale and thick. In a swivel chair sat a long-dried corpse, a prison guard in uniform, his gun on the floor, a black hole in his temple, and dried blood splashed across the console. Rick was silent for a beat, then rummaged the guard's belt and unhooked a large, heavy ring of keys. "Found them," he said, holding them up toward the window. He directed the group to open a heavy iron bar gate and led them into cell block C. Sunlight poured through the high windows, softening the gloom. Most of the walkers were locked in 2-tiered cells, arms reaching through the bars but unable to get out. Only a few prisoner walkers wandered the corridors. "This is like shooting fish in a barrel," Shane said coldly. They cleared the locked cells one by one from the bars, sweeping the block quickly. Rick checked every corner, making sure there were no breaches. Standing in the center of the hall, looking up at the neat rows of cells, he breathed in and said, "It's safe." He turned to the expectant faces around him and announced, "Tonight, we stay here." "This is a good place," T-Dog said, touching the iron door of a cell. "It's basic, but at least tonight we don't have to worry about something crawling into our tents." Luis had pressed for a little privacy and had been given a small single cell in a corner on the second floor. The bars offered little cover, so he hung a thick bedsheet as a curtain, lit a dim camping lamp, and crushed dried mint and herbs, letting the fresh scent cut through the musty air. The smell made the cell feel more like a room than a cage. He lay on the thin mattress, listening to footsteps in the corridor, and let his tension ease. Before sleep took him, he idly cast a revealing spell on the leather suitcase he'd set at the foot of the bed. more a habit than anything else. This time, he shot upright. The lettering on the case had come alive again, a faint silver glow tracing the writing. Huh? Louis said under his breath, frowning. There had been no warning, no eerie noises, no new killings, no sign that something big had happened. No embers, he whispered, thinking of the strange energy he'd expected to see. He rubbed his chin, watching the soft light. Could it be that, without realizing it, he'd triggered the thing? Maybe the whole group's shared longing for a home had concentrated into a wish strong enough to charge the box. He didn't know the exact conditions, but whatever had happened, it was a good sign. Day 1, a perfect ending, he murmured, and let himself relax again. With this base secured and the rest of the prison cleared, he might actually get a chance to study those artifacts properly. Still, he lay awake for a little while longer, wondering what other surprises might be hidden in the prison's solid walls. The next morning, sunlight poured into cell block C, and everyone was already up early, sorting supplies in the courtyard. Daryl was squatting on the ground, a look of disgust on his face as he sifted through the gear they'd taken yesterday. "I don't want to wear this disgusting crap," he muttered. He picked up a knee pad and was about to scrub it hard with a rag when his hand froze. Huh? Daryl wiped his finger across the surface, then picked up a nearby riot helmet to inspect it. Yesterday, when they'd stripped the gear off the bodies, everything had been caked with black blood, flesh, and nauseating slime. Now the helmet was clean, no bloodstains, hardly any dust. It felt slightly damp and faintly of disinfectant. What's going on? He fiddled with it for a moment and looked up. Who stayed up all night to scrub gear? Luis was passing with his backpack and stopped when he heard. I didn't want to wear dirty clothes either, he said calmly, so I cleaned them this morning. What? Daryl rolled his eyes, clearly not buying it. Then how'd you dry them? Over a fire? Something like that, Louis said matter-of-factly, mostly thanks to a special, powerful cleaner. It evaporates pretty fast. Daryl stared at him for a few seconds. Fine, kid. He tossed the gear back on the ground and grumbled. Next time, let your folks do the laundry. Don't take everything on yourself. Don't be some house elf. Huh? Louis blinked. A flash of inspiration crossed his face as he looked at Daryl. Wait. When Glenn borrowed that book from me back at the farm, was it for you? He remembered Glenn asking to borrow that book. At the time, Louis assumed Glenn wanted a classic for himself. Now the pieces seemed to fit together. Daryl's face tightened. Caught. He snorted, grabbed his crossbow, and turned away to hide his embarrassment. It's not like I'm illiterate, he snapped, and walked off without looking back. I didn't even say anything yet. Louis muttered, but let it go. He smiled and shouldered his pack. After a quick breakfast, Rick called everyone for a short strategy meeting. Even though there are iron gates and beds here so we can sleep for now, we can't just stay satisfied with cell block C, Rick said, pointing at the prison map Louis had scavenged. We need more supplies and a generator. The power's been down too long. If we want to make this a permanent home, we have to get it running again. His finger traced routes on the map. I'll put together a team to go deeper in, find the cafeteria, the infirmary, the generator room, and the armory. The squad was chosen quickly. Rick, Daryl, Merle, Glenn, T-Dog, and Al. Just those few people? Morales asked. We don't know what it's like in there. Wouldn't it be safer with more? No. Before Rick could answer, Louis pointed to the narrow passages on the map. I've seen the blueprints. The corridors aren't wide. A lot of places are tight. Too many people would get in each other's way, block lines of sight, even risk friendly fire. This team has the best firepower and flexibility for the job. Rick let Louis into the core of the plan without objection. Shane would stay behind in charge of protecting the elderly, the women and children, and holding the perimeter. As Rick finished assigning roles, he caught sight of Carl struggling to get a riot helmet on and Dwayne clutching an iron rod, eyes lit with eagerness to follow. Rick was about to tell them to stay, but Louis moved first. He stepped over, pressed Carl's hand down as the boy tried to balance the oversized helmet, and led both boys aside with a serious look. Carl, Dwayne, he began, his tone firm and respectful. I want you to stay and help me with an important mission. An important mission. They both looked stunned and curious. Louis pointed to the cells behind them and to Lori, Herschel, and the weakened survivors they'd rescued, who were tidying beds and getting settled. Leave the monsters up front to us. The defensive line in the back has to be run by people we trust most. There are elderly people here, injured women, and the baby in Laurie's belly. He lowered his voice and looked Carl in the eye. If all the fighters leave, who will protect them? Who will be the final shield? Carl hesitated. I wanted to go too, Louis admitted with a rueful shake of his head. But the paths ahead are too complicated, and Officer Rick needs me to guide the way. Seeing Carl falter, Louis pressed on. Uncle Shane's strong, but he's in charge of the whole perimeter, watching the fences and the walkers. He can't watch everything inside at once. And among the people left here, I don't trust anyone more than you two. He took a breath. I want you to help Uncle Shane cover the blind spots, be the eyes behind his back. Then, with slow formality, Louis took the sheriff's hat that had originally belonged to Rick and had been given to him. Under Carl's shocked expression, Louis placed the hat on the boy's head. This hat is the symbol of the sheriff, he said, looking straight at him. Sheriff Rick is going to the front. You're the acting sheriff of the rear. Guard our home. Can you do it? Feeling the weight of the hat, a sense of purpose filled Carl's eyes. He nodded and said firmly, I can. Good. Louis patted Dwayne's shoulder. You're his deputy sheriff. You're partners. Work together. Keep an eye on the perimeter, and don't let anything get near our family. Understood, Dwayne answered just as solemnly. The two boys suddenly felt a mountain of responsibility settled on their shoulders. They moved to the rear and took up positions, watching carefully and no longer talking about going out front. Shane watched Louis quiet the two kids with a few words and raised an eyebrow. He looked like he might ask, if it's so important, why don't you stay? But before he could speak, Louis had already slid back into the front of the line, backpack on. All right, everyone's ready, Louis called, turning and flashing Rick a bright smile. Let's go, Sheriff! Rick exchanged a helpless shrug with Shane, then turned and stared down the prison corridor. His gaze sharpened. Move out! 147. Cleaning up the zombies. As the heavy iron door creaked shut behind them, the last hint of warm sunlight was snuffed out. Darkness swallowed the group as they moved forward. The prison's power had been out for a long time. The deep ventilation had stopped, and the air was thick with a stale stench, mold, excrement, and rotting flesh. The smell felt almost physical, clinging to their skin like a greasy paste and tightening their chests. Click. Rick clicked on his flashlight. Pale beams cut through the black, swinging down the long concrete corridor and catching dust motes and dried, blackened bloodstains on the floor. Stay close, Rick murmured. Keep formation. Don't fall behind. They advanced in a careful search formation. Rick led, Louis close behind. Daryl and Merle covered the flanks while T-Dog and Al brought up the rear. Glenn carried a can of white spray paint and left a conspicuous arrow at every fork they passed. This place is a maze, he muttered after spraying another arrow. Without markers, we might never find our way out. Louis said nothing. He walked quietly behind Rick, his deep blue eyes sweeping the gloom. He focused, senses tuned. One hand held a weapon, the other tucked inside his sleeve around a small hidden blade. He stayed ready for anything. They went on, bodies beginning to appear, mostly prisoners in uniform and a few prison guards. The dead had died violently. Some were torn to pieces. Others had their skulls crushed. A riot had clearly ripped through this place. Suddenly, Louis reached out and lightly tugged Rick's jacket. Stop! Rick froze on instinct and signaled the others. Gun barrels and flashlights swung to face forward and to the sides. What is it? Rick asked in a low voice without turning. Louis pointed toward a T-junction ahead on the right. Something's wrong over there, he said quietly. The smell's stronger, and I can hear something scraping against the walls. You mean walkers? Merle asked, squinting. He could hear noise, but wasn't as precise. Highly likely, Louis said. Rick nodded and sent a few hand signals. The others tightened their grips. Glenn held his dagger in a reverse grip and tapped the metal water pipe beside him twice with the pommel. Everyone held their breath, staring at the dark corner. For a few seconds it was silent. Then came the shuffle and the low, guttural breathing, slow, hungry footsteps. A walker in a grayish-blue guard uniform staggered into the light, half an ear hanging from its rotted face. Its cloudy eyes locked on living flesh, and it let out a wet, excited roar. More followed, pouring out of the corridor like angry hornets. Thwip! Daryl's crossbow bolt flew first, burying in the first walker's eye socket. It fell back, tripping the ones behind it. Thud! Thud! The dull sounds of knives into meat and bones snapping echoed down the narrow hallway. Against the corridor's claustrophobic walls, the squad formed a natural choke point. The walkers could only come through 2 or 3 abreast. They couldn't overwhelm the team all at once. When one lunged, Al braced his spear against its chest, and Rick stepped in to finish it with a machete. Over 20 of them flooded out in that wave. In open space, it would have been a disaster. Here, it was a slaughter. Luis didn't even have to move. He stood in the back watching his teammates dispatch the walkers with machine-like efficiency. Minutes later, it was over. Corpses littered the floor, and the smell of blood was stronger, but the squad was unhurt. "That was damn satisfying," Merle said, grinning as he wiped black blood off his axe. Daryl didn't get into it. He just glanced at Luis and started recovering bolts. "Keep going." Rick motioned them forward, still alert. They stepped over the bodies and pushed deeper. More dead lay scattered, prisoners and guards from the riot. Some pulped, some rotting, but still intact. Just as T-Dog lifted his foot to step over a guard whose intestines spilled across the floor, Luis's voice cut through with urgency. "Don't move." He grabbed the strap of T-Dog's backpack and held him back. "It's not dead yet." Luis pointed to the seemingly motionless body. "Don't be fooled." As if on cue, the corpse twitched. It flipped over and unleashed a blood-curdling roar, its gray hands clawing where T-Dog had been about to step. Its mouth slammed shut on air. T-Dog went pale and stumbled backward, sweat beading on his forehead. If he'd stepped forward, the walker might have ripped a chunk from his calf. Rick was on it. He pinned the walker with his foot and drove his machete into its eye socket, twisting hard. It went still. Thanks," T-Dog breathed, scrambling to his feet. "I really thought it was dead." "Have these things evolved? They can play dead now?" Glenn asked, swallowing hard. "No," Louis said, pointing at the walker's intact head. "They're not smart. When there's no prey around, they go dormant to conserve energy. But if the head is still attached with no obvious damage, that body can spring up and bite." "This is a lesson," Rick said, pulling his knife and wiping the blood from the corpse's clothes. "From now on, no matter how rotted a body looks, if the head's still on the neck, give it an extra strike. And keep our rear secure," Louis added. "We can't leave any hidden dangers." "Understood," everyone answered. From then on, they were even more cautious. Every time they saw a corpse, someone would step forward to make sure it was truly dead. After clearing 2 more scattered waves of walkers, the oppressive hallway finally opened up. Ahead stood a set of double iron doors, tightly secured with thick chains and a pair of handcuffs. "That's the cafeteria." T-Dog pointed at the sign on the door. "There should be the supplies we need in here." The doors locked tight. Glenn stepped forward and shoved, but the door didn't budge. "Locked from the outside. Look at these handcuffs. Must have been the prison guards. Either they wanted whatever's in there locked up, or they locked themselves out. Whichever it is, we'll find out when we open it." Merle chuckled and pulled a pair of bolt cutters from his backpack. Snap. The cuffs fell with a clang. Rick put away his flashlight, took a breath, and pushed the door open. They filed in, and the beams of their lights swept across the room. It was a standard prison cafeteria. Long tables and benches bolted to the floor, arranged in neat rows. There was debris and trash on the floor, but it was surprisingly clean compared to the hall outside. The air smelled stale rather than putrid. The rotten stench they'd gotten used to was much fainter here. "Feels safe," Glenn said, sounding uncertain. "Don't get careless." Rick kept his gun up. "Search the place, see if there are any." He cut off when Daryl, who'd been silent, froze and tilted his head. The hunter raised his crossbow slowly, pointing it toward the back of the cafeteria, where the kitchen storage was partitioned by chain-link fencing. "What is it?" Rick asked. "Movement." Daryl's voice was low. "Doesn't sound like walkers." Louis' expression tightened. He stepped up beside Rick and murmured, "There seem to be a few people in there." "People?" Everyone's nerves snapped taut again. Flashlights and muzzles swung to the fenced-off corner. Rick's voice rang out, sharp and loud in the empty room. "Come out! I know you're in there. Hands up! Walk out slowly. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then something stirred behind the fence. 5 figures rose slowly from behind shelves in the storage area, dust and light catching on their gray prison uniforms. One was small with a mustache. One was big and broad-shouldered. One had long hair and a sinister look, and the other 2 were more ordinary. They were holding clubs, a pistol, and homemade knives, and they stared at the armed group through the chain link with a mix of confusion and fear. The long-haired man was the first to speak. He squinted against the flashlights, and once his gaze landed on Rick's police uniform, he sounded relieved. Cops? A rescue team? Then his eyes swept across Merle's face, more criminal than cop, and settled on Lewis, who stood protected in the middle of the group. The inmate's tone turned mocking. Wait, did I get this wrong? You cops escorting bandits? Merle's face went dark. Click. He flipped the safety off and pointed the muzzle of his rifle right into the inmate's face. You'd better rephrase that, you prick. Merle. Rick grabbed Merle's barrel to push it down, then faced the prisoners with a controlled voice. There is no rescue team, and there are no cops out there anymore. The world outside has been in chaos for a long time. Most of humanity's turned into man-eating monsters. What? The prisoners exchanged doubtful looks. You're kidding, officer, the small one sneered. We've only been locked in this cafeteria for a few months, not years. You're saying in just that time it's the end of the world? Believe it or not, Louis said, pointing toward the exit that led to cell block C. You can go see for yourself if you don't believe us, but don't go too far, and don't make a lot of noise. The inmate looked at the weapons and felt a cold prickle run down his spine. He ground his teeth, but gave a contemptuous, grudging, fine. Neither side lowered their guard. After a suffocating silence, Rick signaled them aside. The group slowly made a path with guns still raised, intentionally or not, keeping the prisoners pinned. The 5 men followed, armed with their crude weapons, trailing Rick and the others through dim corridors to cell block C. When the prisoners stepped into the block, they went still. The cell area was full, the elderly, children, and mostly survivors who were armed and hard-eyed. Shane, on guard duty, tensed as he watched Rick return flanked by strangers in prison uniforms. He tightened his grip on his gun. Morales, Morgan, and the others cast wary looks. What's going on? Shane asked Rick quietly. Found them in the cafeteria, Rick said. Prisoners locked inside. They don't know what's happened out there. Shane's eyes swept over the 5 newcomers like a blade. He nodded once at Rick, then glanced back at the group. A low conversation started at the rear. Sigh, if only Jim were here, someone said. Glenn leaned toward Al, keeping his voice low. Too bad he stayed outside to fix the car with Dale. Al, spear in his hand still dripping with blood, looked up. Why? You want him to come and reason with these guys? No. Glenn shook his head. Jim's not good at arguing. He has a 6th sense. It saved us at the camp, Glenn said softly. He always knew when something was wrong, like an intuition. If he were here, maybe he'd prophesy whether these guys are a threat. 149. Friendly mutual assistance. All raised an eyebrow, momentarily at a loss for words. Then you don't need to find Jim. I can give you a prophecy, too. He glanced at the lead prisoner and said flatly, I can't promise anything about the others, but that guy up front shouldn't be much of a threat. Huh? Glenn froze, surprised. How do you know? Did you see some kind of sign? Lewis, standing nearby, had heard as well and couldn't hide his bewilderment. What was going on? Had the team suddenly taken on too many charlatans? One Jim wasn't enough. Now even broad-browed, big-eyed Al was turning into some kind of soothsayer? But Al's next words left them both speechless. What signs do I need? Al gave a short, humorless laugh as he spun his spear lightly on the ground, the metal scraping. That guy's got shifty eyes. He's been looking at our supplies and weapons. You can tell a greedy, self-righteous bastard like that from a mile away. People like him can't keep their hands to themselves. He stared at the leader, fingers tightening on the spear. He won't be able to help himself for long. Doesn't that mean he is a threat? Glenn asked, more confused than ever. A threat? Al smiled coldly. Only if he's smart, if he's stupid enough to try something. His voice dropped. I'll slaughter him before he can hurt any of us. Dead people aren't a problem. He flicked a look at Rick, whose hand stayed near his holster, and added, Besides, judging by Rick, it might not even be my turn to act. Glenn's jaw dropped. Lewis' mouth twitched in disbelief. Physical prophecy? So Al was the hardcore version of a fortune teller. Hey, interesting, Glenn managed. Merle, who had slipped up beside them unnoticed and listened for a while, gave Al a conspiratorial pat on the shoulder, shark-toothed grin wide. Looks like you've got an eye for people. How about a bet? Bet on when that piece of trash starts acting up. He pulled a half-crumbled pack of cigarettes from his pocket, shook it, and grinned wickedly. I say he won't last past tonight. Al was about to play along when Louis cut in. Let's not. Betting with you only ends one way. Hey, kid, what kind of talk is that? Do you think I'm the sort to welch on a bet? Merle protested. Of course I'm not, Louis spread his hands. But as long as you stand there glaring at him, that guy won't dare make a move. Merle snorted. You mean if I threaten him, I'll push him too far and make him do something desperate, right? No, Louis shook his head. I mean, he'll probably be so scared that he won't even think about resisting. Ha! I'll give you credit for the insight, kid. He waved his pistol, without bothering to look at the prisoners directly, smirking with pride. To those weaklings, I'm the boogeyman. Glenn burst out laughing. Al shook his head and spread his hands to cut Merle off. All right, Mr. Boogeyman, let's go do some actual work first. Their little exchange didn't attract any special attention from the prisoners. Under Rick's lead, the group carefully filed out of the dim cell block C into the outer courtyard. When the prisoners saw the sun they hadn't seen in a long time, the piles of walkers beneath the high walls and the survivors efficiently cutting up the corpses, the last of their doubt fell away. It seems the world really has changed, the lead prisoner muttered. He drew his gaze away, eyes flickering, then fixed Rick with a probing look. Where are you people from? Atlanta, Rick replied. And where are you going? Rick turned and met the man's eyes, speaking with steady certainty. We're staying here. We're not going anywhere. The leader's face tightened. His eyes darted around. Then he forced a smile and pointed outside the wall in a practiced way. Listen, you've got a lot of people, and this place stinks and is crowded. There's a lake about a mile or two from here. Plenty of water, better environment, lots more space. If I were you, with all that gear, I'd set up camp there. Why suffer in this cage? If it's so great, why don't you go? Louis said, arms crossed, looking at him like he was an idiot. Yeah. Daryl, leaning against the wall while twiddling a bolt, snorted. You've been pardoned. Nobody's stopping you. A good place like that should be left for you free men to enjoy, Merle added with a crooked smile. After all, we have a kind-hearted, friendly cop here. He wouldn't mind helping you out and letting you go live a better life. The leader went pale, veins standing out in his forehead, but the short black prisoner behind him didn't get the sarcasm. His eyes lit up, and he tugged the leader's sleeve. Boss, they're right. Haven't we always wanted to get out? No one's in charge out there anymore. We could live by the lake. We could even bathe. Shut up, you idiot! The leader spun on him, furious. Use your head. Look at them. He pointed at Rick and the others, all armed to the teeth, and lowered his voice. They have numbers and weapons and are still arguing about staying in this cage. Why do you think that is? Because it's definitely not safe out there, damn it, the short man muttered and shrank back. Rick watched the exchange without expression. When they quieted, he said in a low voice, So what do you want? The leader's eyes flicked, calculating. This prison was his territory. These people were invaders. His instinct was to drive them out and take back control. But looking at the group's numbers and firepower made him wary. A head-on fight wouldn't go well. This place is huge. Rick didn't want to start a massacre. He offered a compromise. We can help you clear another area. In return, half the remaining food in the cafeteria goes to us. Half? A thin, small prisoner beside the leader scowled. That's our food. Hey, listen to this. Merle couldn't help himself. He picked his ear with a pinky and looked Rick up and down mockingly. I say, friendly cop, why are you starting your charity work again? We saved their lives. We're going to help them clean up, and we only get half. He rattled his pistol as he spoke, the muzzle swinging over the prisoners like a predator choosing prey. Personally, it'd be easier to throw them out to feed the walkers and take everything. The sudden killing intent made the prisoners flinch back. Fine, half it is. The leader ground his teeth and agreed, though reluctantly. Deal. Half an hour later, in another cell block, Rick and the others had the prisoners clear a new area. They called it cooperation. It felt more like a painfully patient teaching session. These men had been locked up for months and didn't know what a walker was. They kept using their old brawl tactics, swinging shovels and clubs at chests, bellies, even thighs. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, but the walkers just kept coming. Aim for the head! Rick barked at the men hacking wildly. Hold the formation! This isn't some bar brawl. Merle stood at the back, scowling, his hand creaking on the haft of his axe. He wanted to charge forward and school each one of them himself. Lord, I'm getting tired just watching these idiots fight. You'd think they'd try to pick a better place to get eaten. It wasn't until Rick strode in and drove a blade clean into a walker's temple as a demonstration that the meaning of headshot finally clicked. Just as the group's coordination began to smooth out, something went wrong. A tall, muscular prisoner let out a yelp when a walker clipped his back. He kicked the thing away. You okay? Rick moved forward to check. No, I'm fine, the man snapped, retreating stubbornly. It just broke the skin. I'm fine. Before Rick could explain how infections worked, one of the other prisoners, tall and hard-faced, a hammer dangling from his hand, lunged forward. He's infected? He said flatly. The man in the hammer swung without mercy, smashing the tall prisoner's skull. There was no pleading, just the sick, heavy thud of the hammer and a body collapsing into a spreading pool of blood. Then, like a man possessed, he hammered the corpse again and again until the head was nothing but pulp. Silence fell over everyone. Rick and Daryl watched him coldly, alert and unblinking. This was a man who would kill a companion without hesitation. There was no moral reasoning in him. He was scratched. There was no other way, the hammerman panted, wiping his face with the back of his hand and giving Rick a wild, almost proud smile. It was a show of force, an attempt to announce himself. Don't mess with me. Rick said nothing, only tightened his grip on his machete. Keep moving. The prisoners exchanged glances but said nothing. When they reached a set of double doors leading to an inner corridor, Rick signaled them to stop. He pointed at the doors and addressed the hammerman who had been tasked with opening them. You open only the left door. Do not open the right. The man nodded easily. No problem, officer. Whatever you say. He took hold of the handles. The instant Rick gave him a confirming nod, malice flashed across the man's face. He forced both doors open at once. Like a dam breaking, a dozen walkers that had been pressed against the doors surged out with a roar. How did the door? The man feigned panic, but he moved with too much speed to be helpless. He shoved the lead walker off balance and sent stumbling toward Rick. Rick, wary of these prisoners, didn't panic. He stepped back and prepared to slice the thing down. But his foot landed on the slick body of a fallen walker, and he slipped. His center of gravity toppled, and he went down hard. Before he could right himself, the shoved walker was on him. Rick! Daryl lunged, but a sharp knife flew from the side and buried itself in the walker's temple. Lewis, quiet and watchful, had anticipated the hammerman's trick and acted the moment the walker tackled Rick. T-Dog kicked the thing off and hauled Rick upright. You okay? Rick sucked in air and nodded at his friends, gratitude flashing in his eyes. He turned and fixed the hammerman with a stare as cold as the blade in his hand. The air around him was hard with killing intent. But more walkers were surging from the door. There was still a fight to finish. Clear the walkers first, Rick snapped through clenched teeth. The hammerman's smirk flickered into disappointment. His plan had failed. He raised his machete and began hacking at nearby walkers. As he braced to strike, another knife zipped past his arm and thudded into the wall behind him, its tip buried deep. If he hadn't ducked, it would have taken his hand clean off. Louis stood in the shadows, still holding his throwing stance, eyes wide with innocence. Sorry, he said. My hand slipped. I was aiming for the walker behind you. The hammerman felt his anger flare. This kid had just been landing precise headshots from distance, and now he claimed his hand had slipped and hit the wall? Was Louis mocking him? The rest of the prisoners' faces turned unfriendly. The man realized picking a fight would get him nowhere. He forced down his fury, put on a contrite expression, and backed away. Fine. About the door. My bad. he said, spreading his hands in a show of faux helplessness. I didn't mean it. These doors, who knew they'd be so hard to open? These are chaotic times. Rick watched him for a beat, then let his expression relax just enough. Yeah, he said, lowering his machete and stepping forward. You're right. The Hammerman felt something like triumph. This group played by the rules. They were the kind you could dominate. He smiled, the victory already in his head. Then Rick moved. The machete flashed, impossibly fast, a cold arc of steel that took the man's head. Blood sprayed. The smile froze mid-formation, replaced by shocked wide eyes as the body went rigid and collapsed at Rick's feet. Rick looked down at the corpse without emotion. Things are fickle, he said evenly. 151. Misunderstanding cleared up. Things happened too fast. The moment the first man went down, another short man who'd been following behind him realized things were falling apart and let out an angry roar. You bastard! He swung the baseball bat and charged at Rick like a bull, ready to fight to the death. He'd only taken 2 steps when a foot suddenly shot out from the side. Don't be in such a hurry. Lewis's voice came from the shadows, calm. The charging man couldn't stop in time. He tripped and went down hard, his bat clattering out of his hands. He fumbled to get up, but a heavy boot pinned him to the floor. Al looked down, the sharpened steel pipe in his hands aimed at the man's forehead. With a brutal shove, Al drove the pipe down between the man's eyes. Blood sprayed Al's trousers, but he didn't flinch. The man's life ended in an instant. Merle watched from behind them, looking at the 2 bodies on the floor. Knowing there was nothing left for him to do, he spat a few contemptuous words. I've hated you pieces of trash for a long time. Who do you think you're playing with? A bunch of rookies. With the 2 ringleaders dead, the rest trained their weapons on the 2 prisoners left standing. The tension in the corridor spiked. Rick flicked the blood off his knife, turned, and swept a cold gaze over the only 2 survivors. Anyone else want to talk about how things change? No. Axel, the mustached man, practically went to pieces. His legs went weak, and he raised his hands helplessly. We had nothing to do with this, really. Seeing Rick's eyes cold as steel, Axel shouted at his companion, panic in his voice. Oscar, say something, quick. Oscar still gripped an axe, but made no move to attack. He stared at the bodies, sighed, and let the axe drop. Forget it, he said softly. They won't believe us. Axel, frantic, tried to distance himself. Please, I swear I didn't know he'd do that. The big guy he killed was our friend. I'm upset too. I only came in here for some prescription meds. Tears of panic were starting to show. Oscar's just a mechanic who stole a car. We're not killers. We're not like that. Rick ignored Axel's rambling and looked at Oscar. And you? Anything to say? Oscar met Rick's gaze with no fear, only a resigned calm. I've never begged for my life before, he said, glancing at the bodies on the floor. I'm not starting now. Do what you want. The standoff held until Louis spoke up. When that guy opened the door earlier, I was watching this area, he said. Those 2 looked more surprised than anyone else. They even recoiled. If they'd been accomplices, they'd have lunged for the guns. Rick's shoulders eased a fraction. The group's weapons lowered a little. They exchanged looks and muttered among themselves before Rick made a decision. Fine. He holstered his gun and nodded toward the prisoners. Come with us. We're going to honor our arrangement. They marched the 2 prisoners down the dim corridor and shoved them through an iron gate into cell block D. Rick swung the gate open and pointed into the dark cell area, strewn with corpses and smelling of rot. This area is yours. This is what we agreed. Split it half and half. He signaled for the others to step back, ready to lock the gate. What? Wait. Axel stared at the bodies, the color draining from his face. You're leaving us here, locked in with these dead people? This is cruel. Oscar, usually taciturn, couldn't keep his voice level either as he looked at corpses in tattered prison uniforms, some of them familiar faces. The world outside's even worse, he said. Compared to being eaten alive, staying with dead people is a lot better, Daryl snapped. Be grateful. Rick slid the iron gate shut and looked at them through the bars, voice flat. At least you're still alive. In this world, that's a blessing. He turned and walked away with the others. Everyone was exhausted and wound tight. They needed to head back, check their safety, and rest. As Daryl passed Axel, he stopped for a moment and in a low voice said, About your friend, I'm sorry. Then he kept walking. The heavy iron gate clanged and locked. Rick led the team down the corridor. Their footsteps echoed and then faded. Louis, however, didn't follow immediately. He waited until their voices had rounded the corner, then doubled back to the gate. Axel and Oscar sat sullenly on the floor. They froze when they saw him return. "Don't get any ideas. I don't have the keys," Louis said, standing outside the mesh. He watched them for a beat, then offered one last piece of blunt advice. "If I were you, I'd take advantage of the daylight and drag those bodies outside to burn them." He pointed to the mangled corpses. "The blood smell is bad enough, but if you don't deal with them, you won't sleep tonight. And in a closed place like this with no ventilation, letting several bodies rot with you. You don't want to catch a disease before the walkers get to you, do you?" Axel and Oscar glanced at each other. Louis's words were practical, and both men found them reasonable. Axel, sensing a way to plead, softened his voice and leaned forward. "Hey, kid," he said, smiling in a wet, eager way. "You seem sensible. Could you put in a good word for us with the sheriff? We're not bad people. We don't want trouble. We just want to survive. Maybe you could let us join you? Or at least not lock us in here?" Louis folded his arms and regarded them like a small adult sizing up a messy problem. "Sheriff Rick's a good man, but he's cautious," he said. "If you really are decent people, I'll speak up for you." But his tone hardened and his deep blue eyes pinned Axel. "Trust is built on honesty. You just said you were sent in for hiding some prescription drugs. Is that true?" Axel's smile froze. He rubbed his hands together nervously, his eyes darting around before he sighed and resigned himself to the truth. "All right, you win, Sherlock." He scratched the back of his head like a thief caught red-handed. "Okay, I'm in here for armed robbery." Before Louis could react, Axel rushed on. "But I swear, it was a misunderstanding. I just wanted some quick cash, so I grabbed a water gun. Really, a water gun, just painted black. I wandered into some random gas station thinking I'd try my luck, and before I could even say anything, the cashier handed over all the money." He spread his hands in helplessness. This should have been at most attempted robbery or disturbing the peace. But the cops didn't believe anyone would use a water gun and actually get away with it, so they ransacked my place and, of all things, found my worthless brother's .38 under the bed and said it matched the description. The judge didn't listen to me and slapped an armed robbery charge on me. That's how I ended up in here. Louis had to fight not to laugh. Axel wasn't lying. This was the same comic relief type he remembered from the show. Along with the taciturn Oscar beside him, Axel and Oscar were the only two dependable men among the prisoners. In the original story, both had later sacrificed themselves for Rick's group, proving their loyalty. Louis had stayed behind to check whether their personalities and usefulness matched the show and whether they posed any threat. After confirming Axel's harmlessness, Louis turned to Oscar. "You said you're a repairman? What can you fix? Appliances, pumps, cars?" Louis asked. Oscar met him with steady eyes and a quiet smile. "I can try them all. Give me tools and parts." He seemed to understand Louis' intent immediately, and without waiting for more questions, added, "Looks like you guys want to make this place a base?" He gestured toward the dark, branching corridors. "This place is huge and complicated. If you plan to stay long-term, clearing walkers isn't enough. I worked here for a few days. If you want lights back on or the water pumps running, I can help." "Yeah, Oscar's handy." Axel chimed in, eager not to seem useless. "I know the layout. Lots of routes, even the underground storage rooms the guards rarely checked. If you want to clear the place properly, you'll need us to lead the way." Louis' eyes brightened with satisfaction. The prison was solid, but its interior was a maze. Its underground structures, the C3, the uncleared administrative areas, because the power had been out, those places were in perpetual darkness. Twisted corridors, dead ends, and damaged vents made natural lairs for walkers. In the show, a short black man who knew those passages had used them to haunt the prison, cutting power and drawing walkers into the core area, an action that eventually led to T-Dog's sacrifice and Laurie's death during her labor. That major hidden threat had been removed by Al already. If Louis could recruit Axel for his knowledge of the terrain and Oscar for his technical skills, they could eliminate future trouble and accelerate clearing the prison. maybe even restore water and power sooner than expected. All right, Louis said. Do you know where the generators are? The nearest one's in the 3 basement behind the 2, Oscar answered quickly. There are 3 diesel generators powering different sections. They should still be functional. Louis kept firing off questions about layout and supplies. Both men answered easily, volunteering extra details. Once he was convinced they were both useful and cooperative, Louis smiled. Thanks. I'll tell Sheriff Rick and put in a good word for you. As long as you don't cause trouble, I think everyone will accept you. Really? Thank you. Axel lit up with hope. Louis nodded and didn't linger. He ran towards cell block C. Rounding a couple of corners before entering the block's hall, he nearly collided with a man who had a crossbow slung across his back and an unamused expression. Where have you been? Daryl frowned, sizing Louis up. Everyone's getting ready to rest and you're still wandering around? Anticipating a scolding, Louis cut in and poured out everything at once. I questioned those 2 prisoners. Major discovery. Axel, the little mustached guy, just robbed a place with a water gun. Not a threat. Oscar's the real deal, a senior repairman who used to work here. He knows where the backup generators are. By the 3. He kept talking, rattling off details so fast they stunned Daryl into silence. The lecture Daryl had been gearing up to give evaporated. Finally, Daryl rolled his eyes, mussed Louis's hair, and said, Fine, fine. You're something else. Don't go running off next time, okay? Get some sleep. There's a ton to do tomorrow. Don't worry. Louis slipped back into his cell. But he didn't sleep. A dim candle burned late into the night. If anyone passed the corridor, they might have caught a faint herbal scent seeping from under the door, wormwood, mint, and another bitter herb. Occasional soft thuds sounded as if something was being ground, accompanied by murmured calculations. The ratio's off, not enough heat. Before the morning mist cleared the next day, black smoke was already rising from the prison's open ground. Everyone wore simple masks or wrapped thick cloth over their mouths and noses as they worked together to shove cleared walkers into a deep pit dug downwind. They doused the bodies with gasoline and set them alight for centralized burning, the first step in the mnemonic. Dr. Jenna had strongly requested. 153. Cleaning. Ever since they had entered cell block C of the prison yesterday, Dr. Jenna's brow hadn't relaxed. Having spent most of his life in a sealed, sterile biochemical laboratory, the first place he'd chosen after the apocalypse was a rural farm with clean air. Coming into this cell block so abruptly, the sight before him was unbearable. Old bloodstains matted the walls and floors, fat rats scurried in dark corners, unknown insects crept into wall cracks, and the air was thick with the smell of mold. Look, he said. I know our options are limited right now, and we can't build a level 3 containment system here. But if we don't want to be killed in our sleep by typhoid, dysentery, or some mutated flu, we have to pay attention to basic hygiene. This place was poorly ventilated to begin with it being enclosed with the backlog of corpses, excrement everywhere, and rotting food scraps. This is a breeding ground for plague. At first, some people thought the doctor was overreacting. In this post-apocalyptic world, a roof over your head that kept out wind and rain was a blessing. Who cared about a few rat droppings? Fuel and disinfectant were precious. Was it extravagant to burn corpses and scrub floors? But Louis stepped forward and firmly backed the doctor. He's right. Louis's tone left no room for argument. We can handle walkers with weapons, but invisible viruses are harder to stop. If we don't take precautions now, and an infectious disease breaks out later, even if we have medicine, it might not be enough to save everyone. Louis was unusually insistent because, in the original timeline, an extremely deadly flu did later sweep through this cell block. They'd arrived earlier this time because of his intervention, and although the timeline had shifted, germs and hygiene hazards don't just vanish because of a butterfly effect. Who could say the plague wouldn't return in some other form? Seeing Louis so serious, Rick nodded and stepped forward to make the call. If we'd been living rough in the wild or on the verge of starving, sure, maybe we wouldn't have the energy for this, Rick said, looking at the group. But it's different now. We have enough hands and enough supplies. If we can make this place safer, why wouldn't we? The kids have to live here. For their sake, we should do everything we can. We can't survive the walkers, only to die from dirty water and rats. With that consensus, the objections faded and everyone began to act. Early the next morning, the place was a bustle of activity. Corpses were gathered and burned, floors were scrubbed until the disinfectant smell ran through the air and smoke drifted across the yard. A reddish blur circled tirelessly overhead. Robin. The screech owl had been given a new job: keep walkers away from the fence while the corpses burned. Based on its past performances, Louis had trusted it to lead the distant walkers, attracted by the smell of smoke, into the woods and relieve pressure on the fence. From time to time it dove down, beating its wings against a walker's head and letting out a sharp call to draw them away. The trick worked well for the distant stragglers, but the walkers already keyed into the scent of living people inside the fence or fixed on the black smoke were harder to distract. Seeing a few of them keep rubbing their faces against the wire mesh, Robin let out two frustrated hoots and threatened to peck them. "All right, Robin, come back," Louis called from beside a cart. The owl immediately abandoned those stubborn ones, glided down, and landed on his bracer with a few indignant cries. Louis smiled and pulled a strip of jerky from his pocket. "You've done enough. Those ones up close are just dumb. It's not your fault." Miguel, nearby helping move bodies, watched with admiration. "Where did you find that owl? It's like it understands you. I want one. Or maybe a smart dog that can watch for us." "I didn't catch it," Louis said, nodding toward someone pushing a wheelbarrow not far off. Daryl picked it up and gave it to me. Daryl, pushing a cart of corpses, paused for a moment. Without turning, he dumped another body into the fire pit. "That stupid bird was huddled in a hollow like a ball of fur. Looked as dumb as you do." His words were brusque, but when he tossed the bodies, he made sure to avoid the direction where Robin perched so the smoke wouldn't hit it. Miguel shrugged. He's all about the words. Dr. Jenna, masked and moving back and forth, inspected the work. "The hygiene here is terrible," he said, pointing at the filth-smeared walls. "This place has been closed up too long. The vents are full of mold, and there are dried body fluids in the corners." Rick nodded. He split people into teams. Since Jackie and others had mentioned the fence's vulnerabilities, Shane, Merle, Daryl, and a few others prepared to go outside and catch some walkers to be used as makeshift guards, as Louis had suggested. Rick took Al, Andrea, and a few more to clear the walkers clustered near the wire mesh under Robin's cover to reduce pressure on the fence. The elderly, the women, and the children would stay inside and follow Dr. Jenna's sanitation plan. Just as Shane and his team readied to push open the iron gate, Carl, rifle slung over his shoulder, the barrel a bit too long for him, walked over and stood in front of Shane. "Take me with you," he said. "You taught me how to deal with walkers. I can help." "No." Rick cut him off immediately. His voice was firm. "This mission is different, Carl. It's better for you to stay here." "I can cover the rear," Carl argued, defiant as he looked to Shane for support. "My aim's gotten a lot better. I've taken out walkers on the road." "Your marksmanship is good. That's not in question," Shane said, giving a small, measured smile. He patted Carl's rifle, then explained patiently, "But not this time, kid. We're going to catch live walkers. That means close quarters work. It takes an adult's size and weight to hold them down. That long gun of yours will just get in the way. If you get tangled up, you won't be able to push them off." Carl pursed his lips. He understood the logic, but he didn't like it. "Louis isn't much older than me, and he goes out on the dangerous runs with you all the time." He scanned the group, looking for an ally. Louis, you think I can do it too, right?" When his eyes found Louis in the crowd, Carl froze. He was instantly stunned. 154. More important things. Louis had already changed into light work clothes, a dust bandana tied around his head, a large bucket in one hand, and 2 brushes tucked into his belt, looking every bit the professional cleaner. Louis?" Carl blinked, momentum fading. "Aren't you going out with them?" Louis stopped, glanced at Shane, fully armed, ready to leave, and looked surprised. "What? Support out there? If there aren't enough people?" No need." Shane waved him off. "We have enough people out there. More people would just get in the way. You should stay inside and take care of the big picture. I mean, take charge of the cleanup." Louis rarely turned down a chance to go on a run. Shane felt a wave of relief. He couldn't let Louis follow and risk himself. All right. Louis shrugged, faced a stunned Carl, and put on a straight face. Carl, fighting isn't just about shooting walkers, he said. Right now, this place needs me more. If we don't clean it, the invisible stuff will kill more people. This affects everyone's lives, so this is the most important thing for me right now. He shouldered the heavy bucket and walked away, leaving the silhouette of an unsung hero. I'm going to mix the disinfectant. See you later. Dwayne and Sophia arrived then, brooms and mops in hand, ready to work. Carl watched Louis' back, and then his friends beside him. The urge to rush out and prove himself evaporated. Did you hear that? He murmured. Rick came over, knelt to be eye level with his son, and spoke earnestly rather than with command. Carl, anyone can be a hero. Anyone can rush out and fire a gun. That takes courage. But if you want to really protect people and be a leader, you have to learn to do the boring, tedious things nobody wants to do, but that have to be done. He gave Carl a gentle pat on the shoulder. Louis understands that, so he stayed. What about you? Carl hesitated, looked into his father's expectant eyes, thought about Louis' words, and nodded. I understand. He took the rifle off his back, handed it to Rick, then ran to the supply pile and grabbed a rag. A few minutes later, Louis bent over mixing the disinfectant powder into the bucket, looked up to find Carl stooped beside him, head down, wiping the railings. Oh? I thought you'd go out with them, Louis teased. Carl stopped. He kept his head lowered. His voice sounded muffled. I wanted to go, but then I saw you stay behind too. He lifted his face after a moment. The impulsiveness Carl usually wore had softened into an uncommon seriousness. I thought about it. If even you think staying to clean is more important than going out to catch walkers, then me adding to the chaos wouldn't help. He hesitated, then said something quieter and truer. Actually, I don't think I really wanted to help just now. I just wanted to prove myself. I didn't want everyone to always see me as a kid who needs to hide in the back. I used to think we were the same. But maybe we're not. Carl gripped the rag with a flush of shame. Louis, you always do the right thing at the critical moment, even if it's not what you want. I can't do that yet. Louis was about to pour more powder into the bucket when Carl's words made his hand tremble, and he almost spilled everything. He looked at the serious boy and for once didn't know how to reply. He thought wryly that he had only skipped one field run to clean. Why did Carl make it sound like a great sacrifice? If he had to choose, Louis would rather clean every day than risk being bitten by a walker. Lori, who had been tidying nearby, had overheard. She came over, slipping an arm around each boy's shoulders. All right, boys. She kissed Carl's forehead. Don't be too hard on yourself, Carl. Wanting to prove yourself is natural, but realizing responsibility matters shows you've grown. Thinking of everyone is good, but right now, protecting yourself and not making us worry is the biggest help. She turned to Louis, eyes full of gratitude and a little ache. Gently straightening his collar, she sighed. And you, Louis, sometimes you act so sensible, I almost forget you're still a kid. Thank you, Louis. From the beginning, you've always been thoughtful. You set the example for Carl at the crucial moments. Lori met his eyes. Rick and I often say we thank God you came to us, that we have another family member in this terrible world. People working nearby smiled at the quiet scene. All right. Merle's impatient voice cut through the moment. He stood at the door, already geared up. Can we stop with the tragic family drama? We're not going on a suicide mission. If we don't leave now, it'll be dark. Everyone snapped out of it. Shut up, Merle. Shane shoved him irritably, and the group set off. Left behind with Lori's arm still around him, Louis felt the warmth of the moment and a little bewilderment. How do they keep imagining things about me? He wondered, then sighed and let it be. Improving the living conditions here was a real priority. He did not want to live surrounded by the smell of blood and brains smeared on the walls, worrying he'd step on an eyeball and get sick. After the brief, warm interlude, the big cleanup began in earnest. They cleared trash and clutter from the Block C hallway, then faced the worst problem, years-old stains and dried blood. In a corner of Block C, Carol, Miranda, and the others eyed the spray bottles Louis handed them, unsure. They shook the green liquid and exchanged looks. What is this? A homemade, powerful organic solvent, Louis said without blinking. It's a formula I saw in a book. It's supposed to break down stains like blood and mold very effectively. You just need to spray this on the blood-stained clothes and sheets, or on the messy floors in the cell block. Let it soak a little, and maybe it'll lift that stubborn grime, Louis said, careful to leave room for the later miracle. But I can't promise how well it'll work. I just mixed it up. You can try it first. Sounds great, Miranda replied with a smile, sniffing the open bottle. It smells herbal, very refreshing. Because Louis had pulled off a few small miracles before, nobody doubted the formula. All right, we'll give it a try, Carol said. Lori took a bottle and, like a mother herding youngsters, waved the children away. You've done enough, kids. Go sit on the steps for some fresh air. This next part's too filthy for you. Louis had meant to hang around and feign help a bit longer, but the women were firm and the kids were out on the steps in no time. Once the children were gone, the women set to work without hesitation. They sprayed the piles of filthy laundry and tossed them into several big buckets of water to soak. They sprayed the walls and floors too. By the time they were done, it was lunchtime. Let it soak and settle. We'll eat and come back to finish the scrubbing, Carol said, wiping her hands and glancing at the still murky water. Everyone agreed and left the musty cell block C hall. Louis, supposedly getting some fresh air, slipped back inside like a shadow. The buckets were murky from the first soak. His so-called potent cleaner was mostly herbal juice mixed with soapy water and lemon peel. It would help a little, but it wouldn't erase months of dried blood and old scabs. What could do that was a cleaning charm, Scourgify, but he didn't want it to look like outright magic. If he cast the charm on the buckets, Scourgify might treat the dirty water as grime and turn it into clean water, and that would be suspicious. So he pulled out his wand and, with a flick and the levitation charm, the heavy, water-soaked prison uniforms rose slowly out of the buckets. Once they hung in the air, he flicked his wrist. Scourgify! An invisible sweep of enchantment moved through the garments and the surrounding surfaces. Stubborn bloodstains vanished as if an invisible hand had scrubbed them away. Fabric returned to its original color, and the walls and floors looked spotless. Louis nodded approvingly, then tossed the clothes back into the buckets. They were covered in dirty water again, but that was only surface grime. Once rinsed, the clothes would be clean. The hardest, darkest marks were gone. Still, the scene looked too pristine. To keep the illusion of a powerful chemical at work, rather than blatant magic, he needed the water to look filthy. Louis added a bit of ink to the buckets and stirred them with a mop until the water ran black. He splashed some of that black water onto the floor and the base of the walls he had just cleaned, making it appear as if old stains had been dissolved and were running off into puddles. Satisfied with the staged disorder, clean clothes floating in filthy water, he sheathed his wand and slipped out. 10 minutes later, after lunch, Carol and the others returned for what they expected to be a long session of scrubbing. They stopped dead. Where the walls had been blackened with mold and darkened with dried blood, large patches seemed to be sliding down in muddy streams. The floor looked like the top layer of grime had been loosened and could almost be swept away with a broom. The effect was exactly like those overblown cleaning demos on old TV shopping channels. Jane hesitated, then reached into a bucket and lifted out a jacket dripping with black water. "Oh my God," she said. Though the jacket looked filthy, Jane found the long hardened blood scabs and grease had been erased. "We don't even have to scrub it. Just rinse it with clean water," she exclaimed. Voices rose in amazement. "This is incredible." Miranda, however, stepped forward more slowly. She touched the jacket but did not join the jubilation. She sighed, a complicated look in her eyes. "What is it, Miranda?" Jane asked, confused. "I'm happy," Miranda said, "but I feel sorry for this child." She looked at Louis in the doorway. "He's a genius born at the wrong time. If he hadn't been trapped by this apocalypse, he would be someone the whole world admired." The cheerful atmosphere cooled. Louis let out an embarrassed laugh and scratched his head. "Ahem, Aunt Miranda, why bring that up now?" Miranda shook her head and fixed him with a serious look. "Before the disaster, I cared about the finer things in life. I spent ridiculous amounts on so-called top-notch stain removers, hundreds of dollars for a tiny bottle, and they wouldn't even do half of what your formula did. She glanced around the dilapidated prison. Look at this place. No proper lab, no measuring cups, nothing. And here you are, in a harsh environment with only raw herbs and intuition, making a cleaner that works like this. If this were peacetime, one good patent could put you on the Forbes list. Considering everything else you've shown about medicine and science, you should have been the brightest new star. She gave a bitter smile. But now you can change a little of our life here by washing clothes. With walkers outside and no world left to sell to, it's a real shame. 156. New developments. When Miranda's voice trailed off, a heavy silence settled over the room. Everyone slipped into memories of the past. How many lives had this damned apocalypse destroyed? If none of it had happened, these children might have grown up to be doctors, lawyers, artists. They might be studying in spacious, sunlit classrooms or running carefree in parks. Instead, kids who never had the chance to taste civilized life had been handed knives and guns, forced to scramble for survival amid blood and flight, carrying responsibilities far too heavy for their years. The mood pressed in, solemn as a memorial service. Actually, there's no need to think like that. Louis shrugged and smiled, trying to be casual. Honestly, people's potential gets pulled out by circumstance. If the apocalypse hadn't happened, even with some knack for chemistry, I probably wouldn't have bothered learning all these dry formulas. I'd have drifted through school like everyone else. So there's nothing to regret. Here, I can use this little talent of mine to make sure everyone sleeps without smelling bad, to get us decent, clean clothes, to actually improve our lives in ways we can feel. Being able to protect my family with my own hands and make life a little better, that's more satisfying to me than being on some Forbes list. He looked around at them, determination in his voice. And even if the world's a pile of ruins now, who says you can't make beautiful things in the rubble? We can't go back, but we can build a new home with our own hands. Maybe when we're done renovating, it'll be better than the world before. There was a short silence, then Herschel began to clap. The old man's eyes shone with admiration, as if he could see the future in Louis. Well said. It isn't about what we've lost, but what we can still make. Exactly. Miranda let out a laugh, relieved. I was being too pessimistic, stuck looking at the past. The gloom dissipated, hope relit in everyone's eyes. As long as they were alive and helping one another, life could be rebuilt piece by piece. Conversation resumed, laughter returned, and people prepared to get back to work. But Carol didn't move for the clothes right away. She hesitated, a thought flashing across her face. After a moment, she walked over to Louis, leaned in, and lowered her voice. Louis, that spray, you have more of it? There's a little left. Louis nodded, then, puzzled, asked, Is it not enough? No, it's plenty. Carol shook her head. I was thinking, since it can instantly break down heavy bloodstains and smells, when we go out scavenging, could we use it to erase scents and traces so people can't track us? Louis was taken aback. He had expected requests, but not such a tactical suggestion, nor for Carol's battlefield sense to have risen so quickly. The spell version of Scourgify might do something like that, but this cleaner definitely couldn't. He cleared his throat, prepared with a plausible-sounding explanation. Aunt Carol, I'm afraid that won't work. Why? Carol looked disappointed. Know enough materials? Finding materials is part of it, but it's mainly a matter of principle. Louis pointed at the bucket of dark water, as black as ink, and adopted a grave expression. Look, while this stuff removes stains powerfully, it doesn't make them vanish, it strips them off the clothes. If you sprayed it on the road, it would mask your scent, but the grime it decomposes would be left on the ground, mixed with the chemical. Besides, the formula's unstable. Its shelf life is extremely short. Like what I just made, if it's not used up now, its effectiveness could be greatly diminished later. So if there's any left, it's best to use it all today. Otherwise, it'll be wasted. I see. Carol recalled the faint light in Louis's area the past 2 nights and the herbal scent that hung in the air. Looks like 20 has been up late making this, and seeing all this bucket water, the filth's going somewhere. I was being fanciful. She felt a little ashamed, and La 20 had labored late into the night to help everyone, and she'd been greedy asking for more. Still, she patted Louis' head and smiled. Sorry, I was thinking too simply, but thanks. Now everyone can sleep in clean rooms tonight. Carol moved to call people to rinse and dry. Lewis watched the lines of clothes fluttering in the air and let his lips twitch. He'd used the cleaner as a cover to secretly cast spells and improve hygiene, worried about infection from incomplete cleaning. He hadn't expected even the simplified effects to spark such big ideas among the others. Lucky I made up a reason beforehand. I'll have to be more careful with this black technology next time. As the crowd bustled, Luis went back to his room with a faint melancholy. Sigh, I wonder when I'll get mastery in 22. He'd reached thought casting for Episci and the Scourgify he'd shown, those he'd pretty well mastered. The revealing spell had been useful once for opening a mysterious suitcase, but otherwise in a world full of walkers he hadn't found much use for it, though the occasional whisper he heard at his ear made him think he might try to reveal whatever that noise belonged to next time. Aguamenti was showing steady progress. The summoned stream was thicker and more stable than a single thin thread. Lumos lasted longer now, steady and gentle, instead of flickering like a bad bulb. Incendio, sadly, still only sputtered a few pathetic sparks, useless for lighting a cigarette, let alone burning walkers. Transfiguration frustrated him the most. Progress there was agonizingly slow. With the world in chaos and his focus on practical spells, that explained part of it, but several months had passed and he was still stuck at the basics, barely changing an object's surface material. This isn't scientific, he muttered. The young wizards in the original books didn't struggle this much. He was a transmigrator after all. His understanding should be better. He had a gut feeling he ought to be good at transfiguration. Once he found the knack, he might be as proficient as he was with levitation, maybe even able to turn people into animals. No idea where that confidence comes from, he thought wryly. Maybe I'm still dreaming the transmigrator dream. He shook off the stray thoughts, step by step. If I can learn disillusionment, legilimency, imperio, or at least get better at practical combat spells like the shield charm or confringo, surviving will be easier. And if I master obliviate, I won't worry so much about exposing 22. He knew he couldn't rush it. He'd only been here a few months. Priority 1 was to research the magical suitcase thoroughly and see if he could use its mechanics to smuggle in more textbooks and props from the wizarding world. I need to speed up my energy accumulation. I hope this ACE AT clearing will give my progress bar a boost. On impulse, he raised his hand. Revealing spell. A familiar halo of light shimmered across the surface of the suitcase. Louis opened the lid and felt a flicker of surprise. The glow around the riddle was noticeably brighter than yesterday. Over the past few days, he'd checked the box each day and thought it seemed a little brighter each time, but the change had always been faint enough that he chalked it up to wishful thinking. Today, it was plainly visible. Strange. 157. Phase goals. Had he done anything significant today? Not really. He hadn't gone on a killing spree to save people from desperate situations like before, nor had he solved any life-or-death dilemma. The only slightly unusual thing he'd done was use those buckets of enhanced dirty water to help Carol and the others with laundry while tidying the place up a bit. That didn't seem related to the 0, so it must be 2. Could that count too? Lewis found it hard to believe. If even prayers in the form of mundane chores could be considered valid and converted into energy, then the threshold for this mechanism was much lower than he'd imagined. If that were true, his options would open up. If he did more of this kind of thing and happened to meet someone's strong need, the energy might just flow in. Making fake medicine or using 20 to clean didn't take much effort for him, and they helped build his persona, 2 birds with 1 stone. He made up his mind. Louis stopped hesitating, zipped the one closed, tucked it deep into his backpack, adjusted his expression, and went back to the hall to join the last stages of the cleaning. Busy times passed quickly. As the last rays of the sun sank below the horizon, the cold prison building was swallowed by darkness. But unlike previous nights, the sickly stench of rot had faded significantly, replaced by a faint herbal scent and the smell of detergent. After dinner, in the Block C hall, everyone sat around several long tables pushed together with empty tin cans scattered about. By the dim yellow glow of a few portable camping lanterns, the evening meeting began. Miranda and Philip, who handled logistics and inventories, reported first. Our current supplies are relatively sufficient, Miranda said, looking at the list in her hand. Especially weapons and ammunition. With what we took from the prison armory plus our previous stock, we could fight a small-scale war. But, she changed tone, concern creasing her face. We've got a lot of people, and with all the heavy work lately, food is being used up fast. And the weather's getting colder. The prison is damp and freezing. We need thicker clothes and more blankets. Otherwise, a lot of people won't hold up through the deep winter. True, Herschel agreed, rubbing his rough hands together. If we don't find a way to stockpile for winter, it's going to be a rough season. And defense, Jackie continued, looking toward the windows. We should reinforce the fences or have people clear them every day. After all, the walker guard Louis proposed is a massive project. It's not something you finish in a day or two. And she stopped, scanned the room, and grew more serious. The prison may be keeping the walkers out for now, but it won't necessarily keep people out. You mean there might be other groups watching us? Shane frowned and instinctively touched the gun at his hip. Whether there are other factions or not, we need 24-hour guard shifts just to be safe. No, that's not what I mean. Jackie shook her head, unease in her eyes. I mean, inside the prison. Inside? Everyone froze. What if someone dies in their sleep and turns in the night? Jackie's words sent a chill through the hall. The doctor said we're all infected with the virus. If someone dies and reanimates in an enclosed cell block, the consequences could be unthinkable. The room fell silent. Surely it wouldn't be that convenient? T-Dog muttered. But Jackie has a point. Morales nodded, serious. Don't forget, dozens of us live together, and the cell doors aren't locked at night. Only Rick and Shane have the 2 sets of keys, someone added. If something happens in the middle of the night, a walker could push a door open and bite the person next to them. So I suggest we at least wedge or tie the doors slightly before we go to sleep, Jackie said. Tie them with rope or prop something against them, anything that would slow a walker down. At least it'd give us time to react, another voice agreed. Then why not just lock them? Miguel asked, puzzled. Use your brain. Daryl, sitting to the side whittling a bolt for his crossbow, threw him a deadpan look. What if there's a fire at night, or an attack and we have to get out fast? There are only 2 sets of keys. How long do you expect it to take to open every door? You want everyone banging on iron doors and waiting to die? Miguel fell silent, shrinking back. One more thing, Merle said, putting his dirty boots up on the table and sounding unconcerned. When I was on watch out west today, I found a gap in the perimeter wall. I don't know what it used to be for, but the inner walls collapsed. The gap's pretty big. It's covered in weeds so walkers won't be getting in right away, but the barbed wire on the outer perimeter there is busted. If someone wanted to sneak in, that'd be their back door. That was a major vulnerability. Rick frowned as he looked at the map, feeling a headache coming on. Patching a large gap and reinforcing the wire would take materials and, more importantly, labor. We'll discuss that later, he said. The primary task right now is to make sure we're safe tonight. After a brief pause, Rick stood and assigned tasks. Starting tonight, everyone secure their cell doors before sleeping. Rope them or wedge them so they're easier to escape from, but not easy for a walker to push open. Shane, you organize the sentries. Rick turned to his partner. We need people at the watchtowers and at the entrance to Block C on 24-hour shifts. Especially at night, we can't let our guard down. No problem. I'll handle it, Shane said. Merle, you and some people check that gap tomorrow. Jim, see if you can find tools and materials to seal it, or at least set some traps. I'll try, if we have the supplies, Jim said. Finally, about supplies. Rick walked over to the yellowed map on the wall and traced a route with his finger until it stopped at a familiar point, King County. If we plan to put down roots here, we need the right equipment and seeds. Shane and I talked about it. I'm going back to my hometown to check the King County Sheriff's Department. Rick continued. Their armory should still have riot gear and ammunition we didn't take before. And Herschel mentioned seeds. We need farming supplies. There are agricultural stores around King County where we can get what we need. No one objected. In this resource-starved world, no one turned down the chance to restock ammo and seeds. Then it's settled, Rick said. We'll move first thing tomorrow morning. 158. Return to Jin County. Early the next morning, a black SUV and a pickup truck sped out of the prison gate, heading north. Rick, Daryl, Glenn, Morgan, and Lewis made up the small Jin County expedition team. Surprisingly, when Lewis tossed his backpack into the car this time, nobody argued or tried to stop him. It wasn't that everyone had become careless. After living together for weeks, they'd learned just how stubborn Lewis could be. So they shifted their energy, turning their pleas on Rick instead. In the half hour before departure, Rick had been cornered by Lori, Dale, and even Herschel, each hoping their usually decisive leader would use his authority to keep the boy inside the safety of the fences. It didn't work. Outside the window, the highway slid past in a blur. Louis sat in the back, watching the familiar landscape with a jumble of feelings he couldn't name. In the original story, when Rick and the others returned to Jin County to look for weapons, the town had been set up as a death trap, Morgan gone mad and filling the streets with traps. But things were different now. Morgan wasn't deranged. He was in the passenger seat beside Rick, talking quietly about nothing in particular. I wonder what this place looks like now, Morgan said, more nostalgic than worried. When we left, it was already a wreck, Rick replied. Hopefully, we can still find some survivors. A few hours later, the convoy rolled to a stop in an alley near the Jin County police station. Louise let Robin wander nearby, but not far. They got out and spread out. Rick and Glenn led, Louise followed, Daryl and Morgan covered the rear. They ran into the station and rushed for the armory, only to find empty racks. Damn it, Daryl said, kicking a cabinet. Not a scrap left. Looks like someone beat us to it. Not surprising, Rick said, tasting disappointment but not shock. Police stations are the first stop for people looking for guns after an outbreak. So what now? Glenn asked. We come all this way for nothing? Rick's face hardened as he thought back to jobs he'd done before the world fell apart. Empty armory doesn't mean the whole town's cleaned out. A couple of bars and a pawn shop in town, guys who were serious about guns. I handled their permits. Those places are more tucked away. People wouldn't think to strip them first. They might not be cleaned out. That's something, Daryl grunted, slinging his crossbow. Led the way, officer. They left the station and started across the main street toward the blocks Rick remembered. Then Glenn, a few yards ahead, froze, crouching behind an abandoned car and pointing down an alley. Wait, he mouthed. About 50 meters away, at the mouth of the alley, two men with guns had a woman pressed against a wall. Their gestures were crude. The woman's steps were recoil after recoil. This wasn't friendly. The distance was too great to hear words, but the scene was plain. Looks like a robbery, Glenn whispered. Rick, do we go? Morgan asked, tightening his grip on his rifle. Everyone looked to Rick. As the former sheriff, the call should have been automatic. His hand slid toward his revolver, then hesitated. A few months ago, he'd have charged without thinking. Now images, people who'd asked for help then stabbed him, Randall's betrayal, the long-haired man at the prison with the hidden knife, flickered through his head. What if this was bait? What if rescuing them led them into an ambush? They were low on manpower. One wrong move and the whole group could be wiped out. Reason said leave. Conscience said stay. Before he could decide, Louis' eyes widened. He bolted like he'd been shot from a bow. Louis! Glenn shouted, lunging to grab him, but catching only air. Louis used Daryl's moment of scanning the surroundings to snatch the crossbow and sprint between cars, closing more than 10 meters in an instant. There was a sharp whine as the bolt flew. At the alley entrance, the man who had been groping the woman froze. A crossbow bolt slammed into his temple and blood sprayed. He slumped without a sound. The second man spun toward the source of the shot, and in that instant, the woman, short-haired, pressed against the wall, showed astonishing reflexes. She grabbed a pistol from beside the corpse and fired once. The robber's head exploded. He tumbled to the pavement. It all happened in seconds. Rick snapped back to action and started them forward. Are you crazy? Daryl barked as he snatched the crossbow back and put Louis behind him. Couldn't you let us handle saving people? What if they fought back? What if you missed? Sorry, Louis panted, staring at the bodies, panic finally catching up. I saw him reach. I thought he'd... The gunshot had done something worse than silence the attackers. Growls began to ripple from the surrounding alleys. Walkers attracted by the noise shuffled and moaned, closing in. "Move," Rick ordered. He cut down two walkers that lunged from the side with quick knife work. "Over there, that store," Daryl yelled, pointing at a nearby convenience store with a heavy rolling shutter. They sprinted inside and slammed to safety just as a few more walkers reached the entrance. Daryl and Morgan pulled the shutter down together, metal screeching, and locked it in place. Inside, the world shrank to dimness, light seeping through ventilation holes and catching the dust in slow beams. Everyone leaned against the shelves, trying to calm their breathing. The short-haired woman sank against a row of canned goods, chest heaving. She wore a heavy, battered dark winter coat over a green sweater. Her jeans were streaked with mud and old blood. Despite the shabby, bulky look, her grip on the pistol was steady. She watched the armed strangers with wariness, then relaxed a fraction when she saw Louis shielded behind Daryl. "Wow," she said. "Your timing was perfect." She handed over a bolt stained with blood, the crossbow bolt Louis had fired. She'd pulled it free and pocketed it while escaping. "Here. This should be yours, right?" She looked at Louis with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "Thank you, child. You saved my life." Daryl, halfway to a sarcastic comment, swallowed it. He took the bolt from Louis, wiped it on his pant leg, and slipped it back into the quiver. The woman holstered her pistol at her lower back, straightened her bangs, and let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Since we're safe for the moment, proper introductions are in order," she said. "I'm Carly. 159. Old acquaintance." "You're welcome, Sister Carly." On the surface, Louis wore an embarrassed smile, but his mind was elsewhere. The reason he'd bolted out so recklessly earlier, even snatching Daryl's crossbow, was partly to protect someone, but mainly because he'd recognized an old acquaintance. That fat guy with an arrow through his head had been one of the robbery trio Louis had run into months ago when he was hiding out in the King County office building. Who would have thought that, even with the world falling apart, they'd meet again? Louis let his eyes linger on the corpse and smiled inwardly. The man hadn't even thinned out. If anything, he looked healthier. It seemed these scumbags had been thriving off other survivors. Back then, Louis had been a novice, barely able to cast a few weak spells and shaking even when he held a gun, forced to flee from these robbers. Now, that version of him was gone. His abilities had improved steadily, and his marksmanship and archery were no longer rookie level. He also had top fighters like Rick and Daryl at his back. Fate had put the men who once threatened him right in his sights, still preying on others, so how could he not take the chance to settle the score? Rick's voice cut through Louis's thoughts. "Louis, what was that just now? We hadn't even checked the surroundings, and you ran out alone. That's dangerous." Glenn, puzzled, added, "Yeah, you were in such a hurry. Did you see something?" Louis immediately lowered his head and apologized, sincere. "I'm sorry. I saw this guy a while after the outbreak. He and some others were robbing lone survivors, and they were brutal. The moment I recognized him, I panicked and couldn't let him get a shot off. I acted impulsively." Morgan put a hand on Rick's shoulder and glanced at Louis with a sigh. "He didn't do anything wrong. He just did what a lot of us want to do, but don't anymore." He let out a heavier sigh. "Before all this, who among us would hesitate to stop people like that? You're a cop, Rick. You'd have been the first to rush in." Rick's caution, Morgan continued, was for their safety. "But Louis, maybe he hasn't accepted all the new cold rules of this world yet. That might not be entirely bad. Sometimes you should give people a bit of trust." Daryl cut him off with a derisive snort. "Give me a break. Trust only works if you have the eyes and skills to back it up. Otherwise, it's just suicide." He shot Louis a sideways look and muttered under his breath, "Besides, I think this kid's adapting just fine." Louis inwardly chuckled. Morgan's view of him was still filtered by the persona he'd had before, one that made the man see Louis as softer than he actually was. The truth was simpler. He'd rushed out because he feared his prey might surrender and slip away. He had meant to shoot one to scare the other, then keep a survivor alive to interrogate about accomplices and hideouts. It was a shame he hadn't had that chance. Carly, however, had different skills. The delicate-looking woman had shown uncanny marksmanship. Before Louis could set up any interrogation, she had put a bullet through the remaining robber's head. Louis's plan evaporated. Carly, who had been watching Louis, suddenly stepped forward. "Wait, you said your name is Louis?" she asked tentatively, then followed with, "Do you know Catherine and Paul? And Dr. Gale?" Louis blinked. "You know them too?" Rick frowned and spoke up. "Those people, weren't they the group that left Herschel's farm?" "I remember there was a child in their group who got bitten and had a limb amputated," Glenn added. Carly stared at Rick for a moment, eyes scanning his police uniform and the revolver at his hip. Then realization dawned. "Oh my God, Dr. Gale was right. You must be the sheriff, who was out cold for months." Once identities were confirmed, Carly visibly relaxed and holstered her pistol. The world is really small. With the distant moans of walkers outside, Carly spent the next few minutes telling them about her trip. After splitting from her previous companions, she had run into Lee and Clementine, and they'd joined up. They'd been planning to head for Macon City in search of shelter. She took a bottle of water from Glenn and sipped, her tone growing heavy. Kenny's son, the little boy who had his limb amputated after the farm incident, his wound got badly infected and he kept running a high fever. When everyone was desperate, Catherine and Paul remembered Dr. Gale, the doctor who had helped them back in King County. They thought she might still be around. To save the boy, Kenny and Lee decided to risk changing course, turning back to find her and, if possible, convince her to come with us. Carly looked at Louis and Rick. "On the way, I heard Dr. Gale and Catherine mention you both a dozen times. They said there was a genius kid with incredible resilience and a sheriff who miraculously woke up after being in a coma for 2 months. I never thought I'd meet you." Glenn brightened. "Harrison Memorial Hospital. That's where Louis learned so much." Daryl, arms folded, tossed a smirk at Rick. "Also the place where our Sheriff Rick took his long sleep course." Rick ignored the jab and asked, "What happened after that?" Morgan cleared his throat and steered the conversation back. "Since your destination was the hospital, how are your companions? And the doctor?" Carly's expression dimmed. At first, everything seemed fine. She lowered her gaze, pain flickering across her face. "The boy was in bad shape, but we found Dr. Gale and convinced her to come. But as we were leaving the area, we ran into a huge horde of walkers, 160, seeking old friends. The group was scattered." Carly ground her teeth. "The scene was chaotic, screams everywhere. I had to run to the other side of town and hide in a dead-end alley to avoid the walkers. Since then, I've been staying in this town, trying to find the others, but I haven't found any clues," she continued. "I plan to grab some supplies and head for the next meeting point, but then..." She jabbed a finger toward the rolling shutter door. "I got targeted by a bandit group." A spark of anger flared in her eyes. "Those 2 men were with them. They took over the big outdoor supply store downtown and turned it into their base." "An outdoor supply store?" Louis's pulse quickened, though he kept his face neutral. He nodded and asked casually, "Where is it?" "Far from here." 2 blocks, at the intersection," Carly replied. "They've got 7 or 8 people left, all armed." Louis said nothing more, just lowered his head in thought. Carly glanced at the armed members in the room, hesitated, then spoke up again. "That store is huge. They've been there a while. There's probably a lot of untouched supplies, tents, generators. You want us to help you deal with them." Daryl, who had been leaning against a shelf, cut in sharply. Carly blinked, then nodded simply. "Yes." "Why?" Daryl sneered. "Don't tell me this is about justice. Because they stole my walkie-talkie." Carly's jaw tightened. "It's my only way to contact my companions. I need it back." "That's your problem," Daryl said bluntly, folding his arms. "We have our own mission." Louis jumped in at the right moment. "There might be supplies we need there." "Cut it out, kid." Daryl shot him a glare and scolded. "Be sharper. Don't be so ready to help just because she might know someone you knew. Who knows if she's in league with them? What if it's a trap?" he added. Glenn, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. Daryl looked over. "How do you know?" "Well, who would use a friend's head as bait to trick people?" Glenn said, nodding toward the 2 dead men in the alley. Morgan agreed, calm but persuasive. "She didn't hesitate to shoot that guy through the head earlier. Brains were everywhere." Daryl fell silent. struck by those 2 points. He opened his mouth but couldn't find a rebuttal. The mood tightened. Lewis cleared his throat and stepped forward to diffuse the situation. Ahem, Uncle Daryl has a point. We can't be sure the people at the outdoor store are connected to those 2. They could be different groups. He glanced at Carly, then down in thought. But I don't think she's lying either. How about this? Lewis proposed. I'll go with her first to check things out. If it's safe, I'll come back for you. No. Everyone, Carly included, though she'd known Louis for less than 20 minutes, rejected the idea almost at once. Louis fell silent, lips pressed together. He didn't press the matter, but he didn't drop it from his mind. Carly looked urgent and honest. It didn't seem like a lie. Beyond settling a personal score, helping her could rebuild ties to people he'd known when he first came to King County. Dr. Gale and Catherine had helped him then. And if he could use this chance to pull capable survivors into their group, their chances of survival would improve. A brief silence fell. Morgan frowned and offered another option. If we're only after supplies and the walkie-talkie, why don't we try to negotiate? Negotiate, Daryl snorted. You want to talk it out? Maybe we don't have to use force first? We have enough people and firepower, Morgan said. Maybe we can make a deal. We don't have to fight to the death every time we meet someone. It's impossible, Carly said immediately. Believe me, those people aren't normal survivors. They're worse than walkers. They attacked a passing group not long ago. They robbed them of everything and… Carly trailed off, her face paling as unpleasant images returned. If I hadn't run and hidden in the chaos, I wouldn't be standing here. When it comes to those bandits, it's better not to think of them as human, she finished. To them, we aren't human, just walking supplies. Rick had been watching Carly closely, scrutinizing every flicker of expression. He had to be responsible for everyone's lives. In the past, if someone had said they knew Dr. Gale and could call Lewis by name, Rick might have dropped his guard. But the apocalypse had taught him hard lessons. Kindness had been used as bait too many times. They were a small group now, and walking into a trap against 7 or 8 armed thugs would be devastating. He drew a deep breath, letting the cold air calm him, then spoke, not fully yielding. We'll go check it out first. If it's like you say, we'll deal with them along the way and help you get your stuff back. Carly began to smile, but Rick held up a hand and stepped closer, his blue eyes hard with warning. That doesn't mean we trust you completely. You make sure you haven't got anything hidden. If I find out this is a trap or you're using us, believe me, you'll regret it. Under that sharp, searching gaze, Carly didn't flinch. She met him steadily and said, Understood.